write the equation of that point with that slope, the first thing I might think to do is graph it, which is a fine idea. But the point 10, 19 is 10 on your x, right? That's the point x comma y. It's an ordered pair, different than slope. It's an ordered pair. So I'd go to the point 10, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Uh-oh. 18. Okay, so check it out. I didn't go quite low enough. The point 10, 19 is here on my graph. Okay, there's 10, 19. Now it has a slope of up 2 over 3. That means as I move from left to right, my graph goes up 2 over 3. Some of you successfully moved backwards with that and said that, okay, if I moved backwards, I'd have to go left 3 down 2. Okay, I'd go left 3 down 2. If I do that again, and I keep working backwards, and I'm trying to draw this line, right? It becomes pretty quickly apparent. That the y-intercept is not an exact or a whole number. It's not an integer. Okay? That it's somewhere here between 12 and 13. And we're not going to guess. We're not going to guess. Okay? Now, there are two ways to think about this. Okay? There are two ways to think about this. We'll do the first way with our brains first. If in 3 spaces, if in 3x spaces my graph goes up 2 units, if in 3 x's my graph goes up 2 units, how much does it go up in 1 unit? What do you think? If it takes 3 units to go up 2 spaces, how much does it go up in just 1 space? Mariah is suggesting 0.6 continued. Yeah, which is what 2/3 is. Yeah, exactly. So here, this slope, yes, yeah, this slope means it goes up 2 over 3. But that also means, that in just 1x, that it went up 0.66. And so it really means it's going 0.66 each time, but that's whole numbers up 2 over 3. Okay, so this slope of 2/3 means that in 3 spaces of 3 changes of x, my graph goes up 2 units. But in just 1 space of x, it would go up 0.66 units, which I can use then to work backwards. If this was 13, from right here, whoop, how far up did my graph go? Right, in 1 unit, how far up does my graph change? 0.66, so how would I work backwards? Subtract, so 13 minus 0.66 gives me what? 13 minus 2/3 is how much?
12.3.
Give me a fraction. 13 minus 2/3 is 12 and what? 12 and 1/3, right? So this right here is 12 and 1/3, so I can say it's 12 and 1/3 plus 2/3 x. That's one way to do it. That's the kind of making sense way to do it. The other way we're going to do this right now is algebraic. Let's go ahead and take some notes real quick. We're going to do the same example, and I'm going to show you now how we can do this algebraically. A2, linear functions.
Okay, wait, but so in one space and going up, is it always going to be the slope?
What?
In every
writing the equation with a point and a slope. Okay, we're going to just do that same example, and we're going to see it algebraically. Levi, pick your head up, please. I don't know why I say please anymore. Okay, so as the example, we'll say the line through that same point with a slope of 2/3. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to write the equation with the slope plugged in. So we know the equation for our line. The equation for our line, let's start writing it backwards because we can. Right, this is the general form. This is the slope-intercept form for a line. Slope-intercept form for a line. Because, again, we need the slope and the intercept. That's why it's called slope-intercept form. Okay? Yep, it's called slope-intercept form because you use the slope and the y-intercept to write the equation. Now, in our heads, right, we already know the slope. So when I'm saying write the equation with the slope plugged in, I'm going to plug in that 2/3 for my slope. Okay, so I'm going to write it as y equals, it's 2/3 x plus some y-intercept, right? Here's the algebraic thought that we were just doing on the graph. Now, the y-intercept, here's what we need to figure out. I need to figure out the y-intercept so that when I go up 2/3, I hit that point. I need this point, 1019, to be true in this equation. So essentially I'm saying I need to figure out the b so that if I do 2/3 times 10, what do I have to add to get 19? What do I have to do, right? Where on the graph do I have to be so when I do up 2/3, I hit the point 1019? Okay. So, in order to force this to be true, in order to solve this for what number is going to make this true, I'm also now going to plug in the point. So I'm going to plug in 1019, which is my x and my y, and I'm going to force it to be true, right? So I'm going to say, okay, what would the y-intercept be so that this is true? So that if I do, can I write it backwards or is that going to mess us up? I can write it backwards. 2/3 times 10 plus some y-intercept should equal 19. Right? If I plug in 10 into my equation, I should be able to get out 19. Are we okay with that? Okay. And now I'm simply solving for my y-intercept. I'm solving for my b value. I go on my calculator, I do 2/3 times 10, or I go in my head and I do 2/3 times 10. I get 20/3. Okay, 2/3 times 10. Let's do it on our calculators. Always use parentheses around your fractions. Still the same rule applies. Parentheses around your fractions. 2/3 times 10, 6.67. See, that's why we should use fractions so well. 6.67 plus my y-intercept is 19. It's 20/3. I don't know. It's okay. And now, as I'm solving, right, to solve this, I go ahead and subtract 6.67 from both sides. On my calculator, instead of rounding, because I don't want to round on my calculator, I'm going to do 19 minus my answer. Okay? 19 minus my answer gives me that 12 1/3 that we knew we were supposed to get. Okay? So I get that my y-intercept is 12.33. I know that it's not matching right there, because I'm using the exact answer here. So the y-intercept is that 12 1/3. Okay? What we're trying to keep combined, here's what I'm trying to tell you, and we're going to go now into the business context of this. What we're trying to say is that I want us to move towards this. Or rather, this is going to be helpful as we go into real life numbers, right? When we can't graph it, when I can't graph it and when the slope is weird, this algebraic approach is going to be helpful. Okay, so that I would get the same thing as I had before. My equation is 2/3 x plus 12.33. Alright, some notes for us. Now, I'm okay with whichever way you're doing it, as long as we're getting the 12 and the third for now. Okay, this is just showing some of us who are ready to start getting our brains to the next level. Okay. For your homework. Thank you. Hopefully there are avid transfers. Right, but you're not paying any attention. I would encourage you to keep the skill where you're actually paying attention, actually learning. We're taking our quiz on Friday. It should be a time where we all are improving, and your accuracy is improving. Okay? We're talking about 26. There you go, 7 minus 2x. Andrew. Okay, 27. The equation is y equals $1. Yes, it's a function because each input, a reminder, a function, get it off of your pencil. Sometimes drives me crazy. Thanks. A function is where each input, for every input, there's only one output, right? So no matter what size, it's still $1. It's not like if you order a 12-ounce drink, you're going to pay either $1 or $2, right? There's only one price. That's a function. Okay? Yes. Yes, but this is just, that is another example of a function, but this is, a function equation. Okay? Graphing your equations. Important note, A, 3x plus 1 has a y-intercept of 1. It's going up by 3. Part B, noticing the difference. This y-intercept, it's like I had a plus 0 right there, but I don't write the plus 0 because it's not necessary. Okay? So there's two things we're starting to think about. One, slope and y-intercept. We've been working on that the whole time. Two, also, is that if I plug in these x's, the y's are what I get out. Okay? So if I plug in 0 into my equation, if I plug 0 into 3x, 3 times 0 is 0. If I plug in 1, 3 times 1 is 3. If I plug in 2, 3 times 2 is 6. Okay, that's another connection we should be starting to make between the table and the rule. I can also see that connection right back here. If I plug in 1, 3 times 1 is 3, plus 1 is 4. Plug in 2, 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7, and so on. Okay, y equals 3. What's the slope right there? What's the slope? 0. 0. The slope is 0, has a rise of 0. Okay. One way to think of that, y is always or equal to 3, right? So each of those points is 3. The other way to think about it is y flies. That's what my teacher told me my freshman year of high school, and I've always remembered it. I don't know why. She was like, y flies. I was like, okay. That was the answer. X doesn't. That's my rhyme for you. Okay. Y flies, X doesn't. It just does that. Okay? Yeah. What? Okay. Alright. Here we go. Finding the slope. Maybe using some slope formula. Maybe doing a little y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Because you didn't want to graph those points. Get a slope of 2.55?
How do you...
Yes, I know. Yeah, I go over all, those are what I want you to focus on. I want you to talk about all of them if you finish early, and then I'm going to talk about all of them. I just talked about 28. Are you cool? Okay, yeah.
Did you focus on the number problem?
No, if you did it backwards, okay, here's the thing I'll tell you. whether I do y2, 182 minus 167, and then x1 or x2 minus x1, it doesn't matter which way I find the slope, so long as I start with the same point on it, okay? So if I wanted to, I could do 167 minus 182, right? I could flip this around so long as I also flipped around the bottom, okay? If I did it the other way, yes, because if I do it the other way, let's say I did it the other way, Mariah, that's how you did it, right? Okay, if I'm doing this, I could also do it as 167.6 minus 182.9, but then I would have to do 66 minus 72, and I would here get negative 15.3 over negative 6. The negatives cancel out, and you get positive 2.55. Okay, so it doesn't matter which way you find the slope. Do you see what I'm talking about, or no?
Yeah.
Some of you do.
It doesn't matter.
Those of you who matter.
Well, it does matter. You have to put, you have to make sure the 15 are going back.
No, I mean, it doesn't, like,
No, she's talking about the order you subtracted.
like this is what I'm talking about, Arden. Oh. So it doesn't matter which y I start with. It doesn't matter if I do y1 minus y2, as long as I then do x1 minus x2. It's obviously the top part matters. But I'm saying whether I do 167 minus 182 and 66 minus 72 is the same as if I go backwards. If I do y2 minus y1, x2 minus x1. Okay. All right. That conversion, that's the conversion for inches to centimeters. So there's 2.54 inches or centimeters in an inch. Evaluating the function, a few of you came in to ask a quick question. We have seen this in our notes and as a warm-up. This notation, P of 10 means you're plugging in 10 for the H. So I plug in 10 for the H and get 110. Plug in 32 for the X. Okay, so that's what this is saying. This is saying C of 32. What happens when I plug in 32? This is saying P of 20. What happens when I plug 20 in for N? And this one I actually showed all of my work. Okay. Okie dokes?
Yeah.
31, a half, 0, undefined. 32. That's kind of a fun one. You guys don't have to worry about domain and range questions yet. We'll get there eventually. We're not ready. Huh? You could explain it. The possible x values. There's a limit to this function, right? So, for instance, can you have negative x values? Well, that was obviously a leading question, I suppose. Why can you not have negative x values? What would that represent if you had negative x values?
Negative degree.
No.
Oh,
Negative x
you're
values.
going up.
Yeah, a negative x would be like, if 0 is the surface of the Earth, negative x is going to be when you're like
Why?
up above. Or you might say, hey, you could have up to negative values if this is sea level below Earth, and like you want to go up to Mount Everest, right? But what?
Wouldn't the equation be different if it was underground?
Right, but that wouldn't necessarily fit the equation, okay? Because it's talking about the surface of the Earth. And what's the other limit? Is there a how far down can I go? The center of the Earth. Anyone? But what's going to happen if I go through the core of the Earth and then I keep going? What happens to the temperature as I? Right. So the temperature of the Earth. If I was going to drill, I don't know, right? Like, did you guys ever say that when you were digging a hole? I say my dog's doing that. Right. But I think the opposite side of the Pacific Northwest is just water. I don't know. Right. But if you were to potentially.
I have a sphere up here.
Of course not.
Up below.
Hold up. Hey, stop. Right, if you were going to go all the way through. You hit the core, and then at some point the temperature would start cooling off again as you got back to the other surface. So thinking about this, you could answer what are the possible x values, because we still can think critically about that question. Okay. Anything else on homework?
Can you go over
Yeah, I can go over 26. I put it on the graph. Put it on the graph. And the slope is -2. So here's one thing you could look at about the slope. The slope overall, if I look at the overall slope from 9 to 1, how far does it go down from 9 to 1? 9 to 1, it goes 8 down, and then it goes over how many? Mariah's the only one who's... Okay. If it goes down 8 over 4, that simplifies to what? 8 over 4 simplifies to?
1/2.
No, 8 over 4 simplifies to?
Oh, to 2/1.
To -2 over 1.
Okay, that's what I
Hey, come on. Can you knock it up on doing the practical classes? It's more of a group work time.
I hate the way you turn.
Scoot on back. Scoot on back. Here we go. Here we go. Yep. All right. Okay. Here's where we're going. We're having a similar worksheet this time, or some similar scenarios rather. Your groups are going to be presenting these. Your groups are going to be presenting these. You have 10 minutes to be done with this fact sheet. I wanted to erase it, but I can't find my erasers. I'm going crazy. Okay. This is our overall. We can talk about this as profit, and we can talk about our x-axis as items sold. We all are getting that part. Okay. Technically, like I mentioned last class, technically here, if I'm operating in the red, anything below my break-even point would be considered a net loss. Anything above my break-even point is a net gain or profit. Okay. Now here, let's talk about these 2 points on the graph. Thanks, okay? If we're talking about those 2 points, essentially, those are 2 points on the graph, right? When you're finding your profit per item, what are we actually mathematically finding? Starts with an S. Ends with a lope. Good. Slope. Okay? So the first point says, hey, we've sold 170 items, 170, and we're still at a loss. This is the point 170, negative, hit me with that number 3.
99.
No, it's not.
8.5.
Mickey. Point 50?
Yeah.
Okay. So here's 1 point. After selling 170 items, you are at a net loss of negative 388.50. And then the second point on the graph says, awesome. Then if we increase that, and now we've sold how many? 650. You're at 1, 4, 6, 7, 5. Okay. So here, essentially, you're dealing with 2 points on the graph, and you're trying to find, okay, fantastic, from here to here. Oh, I'm pretty close. Kind of. Nailed it.
That's the way you
Nailed
answer
it.
yourself up and you're like, I can do it.
Self-talk, you know? Essentially, I need to find the slope. I need to find the slope. Now, 2 ways, right? 2 ways I can find the slope. One, I can think critically. And I can think, okay, the difference between my y's, and I'd have to make $388 to hit my break even, plus 1146. That's my total gain, right? My total gain is somewhere around $1,600 between, and that's in selling roughly 500 items. Okay, this is just the estimate, because that's what we're talking about when we're talking about slope. How much did we make? Your 10 minutes is up. How much did we make? And how many items did we sell, right? That's what we're talking about slope, our profit per item. How much money did we make, over selling how many items. The other way, of course, that we could think about this is we know that slope, right? I know slope is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So some of you guys over here, we're talking about you subtracted these two numbers, the money, you subtracted the numbers, and why you shouldn't is because if I'm really doing that then, if this is my y2, if I'm really subtracting, I have 1146.75, but I'm subtracting out a negative 388. Right, and what happens when I subtract a negative? It's really adding, and why that makes sense is it's really adding those two together. Okay, so I really am finding the change in the monetary stuff over the change in how many items I sold. So like Ava and Eli, right? You guys have this on your paper already automatically. I don't know what number you get. I'm guessing here because I don't know. No, but before that. Awesome, thanks. Divided by 4 or something? Alright, so that's really when we're trying to find our profit per item, we're trying to find our slope. What I want you moving towards is the notation piece, right? We're trying to keep this connected to the math. Trying to keep it in terms of finding slope and finding y over x. Okay? Now, guess what? Now I'm going to ask you for the equation. I'm going to say, hey, what was the startup cost down here? You have a slope and a point. Man, if I had a slope and a point, it would sure be helpful if my teacher ever gave me notes on how to find an equation with a slope and a point. You know what I'm saying? Earlier today? Great, okay? Finish those problems. This one was the front. Do the same on the back. Be ready to talk about your work. I'm going to give you your 7 minutes back, okay? Fading. Dead or I'm close. I hear lots of good conversations happening. Lots of you trying to make sense of what's going on, which is good. Because here's the deal, right? Like, the temptation that it's easy to fall into is it's easy for me to sit here and have you be quiet and go over math. Right? You guys will get plenty of that next year in your math class. Okay? That's what we're trying to avoid. Right? I think you know that's not how you learn, and I know that's not how you learn, right? So we're trying to avoid that. But here's the rub, is that if we're not doing the work, if you guys aren't doing the work in your tables as individuals, asking for help and trying to actively make sense of this, right? If you're not doing that piece, then we have to go to the mediocre way of learning. Okay, so you need to make sure, given that time, that you're engaging right there. And that's the moment where you're asking questions. You're trying with your team to think of, okay, profit per item and slope, and trying to make real life sense of it. Give him his glasses back. Okay? So you're trying to make the real life sense of it. Okay? These are the questions that are going to be on your quiz on Friday. And I need to be able to see, no, you're not. I need to be able to see we're trying to draw the connection, right? We're not trying to memorize random stuff. I'm not trying to memorize and make random stuff. Hi, Manuel. Okay? I'm trying to say, I'm not trying to just memorize, oh yeah, okay, subtract the negative, or add it when it's negative and then subtract over there. If you're trying to memorize random stuff, you're going to fail. Not meanly, but that's not learning. Okay? So we're trying to make sense of this. We're trying to connect slope to profit per item. Let's go backwards and finish talking about this, and then I want to ask you guys to finish number 2. Okay? Here, if I finish writing that out, that means I get a profit per item, or a slope, of 345. Okay, so I have a profit per item of 345. Yeah?
Sure.
Everyone on this first part, it's been 20 minutes now, I would hope, do we all have a profit per item of 345?
Yes.
Okay, or at least are correcting our errors. Now the next thing to think about, the next thing is that I need to know my y-intercept. I need to know my startup cost. That's my next question. I need to know where I'm at so that after selling 170 items, this is where I end up. Right? I need to be able to work backwards. It's the same as our warm-up was today in that example we did. Okay? So again, I can think of it two ways. I can think logically. I can think through it in terms of items sold and profit, and I can work that way. And I can also do some algebra to back that up. Okay? We're going to do it both ways. I'm going to take roughly 4 minutes. Can I get 4 minutes of active attention? Yes? 4 minutes where I want your brain active, and then you guys are going to finish out. Okay? So, if at $3.45 per profit per item, I sell 170 items, how much did I make? Or how do I figure that out? 170 times $3.45 tells me that after selling 170 items, when I was somewhere-ish, okay, wherever I was here, after selling 170 items, I make a profit of 588 something. 588, 586. Point? Okay, so I made, in selling 170 items, 170 items at $3.45 per item, I make $586. So if that still has me at a loss of negative 388, where was I before I made that money? How do I figure that out? Conan? Yeah, I would go backwards from this. I don't think so, because if I do 586 minus that, I'm going to be at about 200.
Negative 588 minus 88.
Okay, so yes and yes. I'm adding and or subtracting depending which way you look at it. Okay, I need to go backwards. So I need to say negative 388 minus the 586 to put me at 9 something. Even? Fine. Is it 975? Yeah. Okay. So that means I'm here at negative 975. So yes, you could have added these two numbers and made it negative or something like that. That means my startup cost was $975. My startup cost was $975. Okay. Look. Second way to do it. Because we're going to bring it back to this. I could have also done this. I could have also said, hey, guess what? I have this point. I have that point. I have this slope. I want to figure out my startup cost. I know it's mx plus b, and I know my slope is 345x plus my startup costs, and I need it to be under that point. I need this to be the x and y in my equation. So if I do that, and I get that 345 at, right, my profit per item is 375, I sell 170 of them when I plus my startup cost, and I have negative 388.50. Okay? This is the algebraic way of saying what we just did. When I multiply these together, I of course get 586.50. So in selling 170 items at $3.45 a piece, I make $586. And to find out my starting value, I subtract this. And I get my y-intercept of negative $975. Okay? It's the same thing each way I do it. Same thing each way I do it. Okay? I would like you to try and do the algebraic way for number 2. I need it on your way out the door today. Okay? Try the algebraic way. Try the algebraic way for number 2. You guys have 5 minutes before class ends.